You're grinding every day. Long hours, no backup, no accountability. That ends now. The Empower Solopreneur Mastermind gives you one simple advantage: a weekly power session that turns isolation into domination. Every Friday morning on Zoom, you'll get real coaching and real feedback to make real moves. Join a group of driven professionals in a program designed for solopreneurs and people working at home. Stop getting stuck. Start scaling. Seats are limited. Lock in yours today at modernobserver.com/empower-mastermind.
We are lighting the candle, a world that works. Hi, everyone. I am Bill Correll, and I'm here with my partner in empowerment, Jan Jeremias. And the two of us are taking this snowy winter day. The sun's out, it's shining and everything, and we're kind of reflecting a little bit upon some of the goings on in the world. And I think probably not a bad idea if we just kind of let you in on some things that we've noticed or what the seemings are to us. Not from the standpoint of a complaint, but how about the standpoint of who's in charge of quality, who's in charge of our lifestyle, who's in charge of making things affordable for most people in the country, as opposed to working to engineer a system that's very profitable. Do you think that's a good way to say it, Jan, or would you want to tool it a little bit?
Well,
Or do you want to talk about something else?
maybe something else at this point. Yeah, I mean, I think I look at it as, to the best of our abilities, that we have to start getting honest and being realistic about our own health and well-being. And that's always been my mission, because I've always felt like if I take better care of myself, then I am a less of a tax on the system, and I'm less reliant on the system, whether the system is working or not. I basically navigate my life outside the system as much as possible.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the way I've taken it for the last, especially for the last 5 years, 10 years. It's been like, okay, well, the better I take care of myself, the less I have to rely on systems, which I don't think are really working very well, because I don't really think they get people healthier. I think they actually are temporary fixes for a lot of things, which doesn't do a whole lot.
Right.
Because they're not addressing the root cause.
That's an interesting concept. When something is an acute situation,
Right, that's different. And I'm not saying for an acute situation you don't go in. I mean, I fractured my foot. I had to go and get it looked at and see what was wrong. But for everyday, what I might call ailments, which are lifestyle-based ailments.
Right. Well, I think, let me add a little bit of Bill definition to what I mean by an acute situation. Most people, if given a choice, will shy away from going to a doctor or an emergency room. I'm going to use that as a blanket statement, knowing that your mileage will be vary and there's a bell curve. But if you look at the center population of 60 or 70,000 people, or 70% of people, most people would rather play over a hurt, and they would rather get back, on a wellness track by themselves using their own process or protocols or whatever you might say. So what I'm saying is that when those people have a need to go to the emergency room or to seek assistance with symptoms that they're having, for them, it is acute. It's not chronic. It's not something that's built over time. But what they're starting to see is the iceberg starting to float up to the surface, and they're starting to see the results of deficiencies in behaviors. Could be nutritional, why did you break your foot? What happened? Was there a loss of balance? What are the other things that are there that over time, had we prepared ourselves? Now, if you remember, were you around in the 1960s when childhood fitness was really a big thing?
I mean, I remember having stuff like that in school. Yes. It
Right.
was, yeah, but I do have to disagree with you. I think people aren't trained to look for the signs to know whether things are manifesting earlier than they notice. I will agree with you with the fact that when you develop, let's say, an issue, most of the time it's been under the surface, kind of perpetuating and getting worse even, and we ignore for a long time. It's very easy for us to distract ourselves and say, oh, this is the new norm, I'm getting old, like all the caveat phrases that we use, like the lump phrases that we use to kind of sit there. And then we go to the health professionals, and the health professionals, when we can see them, sort of like basically poo-poo them. They're like, oh, well, that's your age.
Right.
Or, well, what do you expect? Your family had that.
Yeah.
Well, personally, I take very strong offense to those kinds of comments. Like, they drive me nuts, basically. And a lot of the people I hang around with, they drive nuts. But I think that we're not trained to do so. And we're not paid attention to when we actually talk about it and want more information.
Well, I love what you're saying, and I think it's a different cut at the definition that I'm proposing. I'm actually not saying how things are, but what I'm saying that in order for an acute event to occur in what actually is a chronic situation, how about someone who has abject knee pain after a fall and finds out as a result of going to get it checked out, you have really advanced arthritis and you didn't know it.
Oh, no, absolutely.
So what I'm proposing here is that those folks in the middle who 99% of the time never need a hospital, never need a doctor. I mean, they just keep paying their insurance premiums. God bless them. And they're supporting the people on the left-hand side of the bell curve who are in there all the time and have no insurance and have, no prospect for ever getting better. Like a whole group of different people, all different for sure. But the folks in the middle, when something isn't really working for them, they can't take care of their normal daily chores, their activities as an adult, those kinds of things. That's very acute for them. It needs to be resolved so they can get back with their life. We're not in a position to help people with those needs right now in a time frame that actually makes any sense. And I can tell you that I've been seeing my same primary care physician who retired 3 years ago for 40 some years. In the day, today or tomorrow, she always had time for an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
I am not in that position. My physician is no longer in charge of her schedule.
Yeah,
The
no, I
hospital,
know.
she punches the clock just like everybody else.
I
and
had
she
a
goes-
I had a student who wasn't a gynecologist, was an obstetrician gynecologist. And as she got older, decided she didn't want to practice obstetrics anymore because she really didn't feel like getting up in the middle of the night anymore.
Yeah,
After being an obstetrician for like 25 years.
like a fireman. Yeah.
Yeah. And she became a gynecologist. She used to be in private practice. And then she went in and she was in in a hospital type setting where she was still a private physician and she had office hours. And she said that she would get called, like it used to be when she handled her own schedule, she always allotted like 2 time slots or 3 time slots a day, which were for emergencies. which were for, like women who came in with severe like infections and things like that, that couldn't be put off because, who wants to walk around with a urinary tract infection? Because
Yes.
it can turn into a kidney infection, kind of thing. And she said when she shifted and moved over, she no longer was in control of her schedule anymore. And she would be told, you have to push it out till tomorrow or the next day. And she's like, how do you tell people, like, sorry, like, you just got to like manage for the next 2-3 days a week until you come in, and hope that it doesn't get worse or go to someone else. And she was miserable as a doctor. She was like, this isn't why I went and started practicing medicine.
Right.
This is not what I wanted. And a lot of doctors do it because, I've worked with, OBGYN has, which I'm not saying has one of the highest malpractice insurance rates. And so a lot of doctors will go and get affiliated because malpractice insurance is so high. That and orthopedics.
Absolutely. And the reason that it is because there have been really ridiculous lawsuits with unbelievably nonsensical awards for things that, I'm sorry, when somebody has a loss of mobility, in my mind, I can see no way that it would be worth $93 million to that person. But that's what juries do. They do stupid things like that, which makes it absolutely impossible to keep the line of really intelligent, smart, hardworking people coming through the medical field. They're going someplace else. Do you know that it's harder to become a doctor than almost anything else, any other practice out there, okay? It's easier to become a lawyer, and a lot of smart people are choosing the law for two reasons. Number one, it's really hard for them to get sued and be found at fault. But and then the other thing that a lot of people do is they choose another way to go entirely. There are people who are extremely proficient with eye-hand coordination skills and would be fantastic surgeons. And in our country, it's next to impossible because there are so few slots available to train competent people. This is what our medical system has moved towards, that the hardworking, put your nose to the grindstone, keep doing it long enough and you will succeed. Medical practices that we had back in the day, where we had general practitioners and then we had specialists, but they were their own practice. Surgeons were part of a surgical group or on their own, so on and so forth, and that sort of thing. And now it makes more sense for them to make less money gross per year and have fewer dollars in terms of consequential costs of being in the business that they are in. So, for example, somebody who goes to work for Hartford Healthcare and punches a clock and gets paid $170,000 a year makes $170,000 a year in and year out. There's never a year where it goes to $550,000 and the following year it goes to 80. But in a regular practice, for instance, people who were in general practitioners during COVID, a lot of doctors starved because they were not in a position to do telemedication. They were not in a position, to do billable. Well, we didn't have those during COVID, but you remember ICD-9s? Those were essentially billing codes.
I know what ICD-9s. I worked in the health, I worked in hospital settings for 24 years. So yeah.
Your and my knowing isn't all that important. I was going to try to distinguish it for our listeners.
Oh, okay. Because you were asking
massive
me,
books.
too.
There were massive books with thousands of described procedures with a billing code. They didn't really offer them as a billing code, but if you didn't have an ICD-9 code on your Medicare or Medicaid bill, you didn't get paid. Okay. So what this basically said was, And the reason it went away was because people were not using the correct ICD-9s, and they were usually defaulting to ICD-9 codes that paid them more money. So on and on and on it goes. There's this, we create a system, and then people figure out a way to what I call diddle it, and that means to cut corners and steal. We have the stealing occurs, in my opinion now, and I'm making this up, guys. I don't have any evidence for it other than watching bills go up and service go down. It's really systemic, and it's in my opinion, again, kind of an unholy alliance between the federal government and big medicine. And like so many things that we're seeing, there's so much available for fraud and abuse. You know what got me thinking on this line, Jan, before we got on the call?
Yeah.
I was thinking about being self-aware. I was thinking about the way that you and I were raised. I'm going to assume that there was some similarity to it because I think there kind of was. Our culture essentially taught us to be responsible, taught us to be on time, to be effective, and to do our best. And the last 25 or 30 years, I think the rewards for doing that have been to get lost in a sea of mediocrity, where the system has not, in most cases, generally been interested in distinguishing people who are excellent and removing people who are poor performers. Quite the opposite. It's been about maintaining a certain set of numbers that are predictable and are profitable. And I just keep hearing different things in different industries, that especially where the government has gotten involved. And the sad part of it is right now, it was predictable to us in the 1990s when they were talking about universal health care. They were talking about all these different things. And they kept saying that this is the United States. Our consumers will not tolerate a loss of service. Well, we're sitting here 30 years later, 25 years later, 20 years later, and a little bit at a time, it's just gradually kind of gone a different direction.
I think the other thing that you talked about, the word awareness. And when I think of, when I said that I don't, and I think about that as being personal awareness, which is threaded to me with personal responsibility. And I drive home this idea of, we all know basically everybody knows what you need to be healthy. You need to eat right, sleep enough, move to some extent, meaning move your body in some way. And you need to manage your stress, and you need community or connection. We all know what it means. But how many people actually do it is very few. And how many people understand what it means? I speak to people all day. And if I ask someone, do they eat well? They will tell me yes. They eat well. Because I don't think people realize what it means to eat well. They think eating well is eating home or preparing whatever it is from a box or whatever, but by them, in their own kitchen.
Yes.
I don't think they understand what it means to eat right and eat well. I don't think they understand that, and I'm not talking, I say move, I'm not talking about spending hours at the gym. I'm spending, get outside, get some fresh air, move, take a walk, make sure you don't sit too long. So now my new thing is that I can sit a long time during the day because I'm online a lot. And especially if I'm working and I get wrapped up in I was writing a lot this weekend. My deal is I can write for a half an hour and then I have to get up and move. And I set a timer now because otherwise, first of all, my back ends up killing me because I can't sit for that long. So eventually it bothers me, and that's a chronic thing. So I have to be smart about it. But I just like, we all know what to do, but very few people take responsibility for it before something goes wrong. Very few people take care of themselves before something happens. You
Well, I
know,
think
really, we live with this idea that we're indestructible, that we like, even if we grow up and, basically, I mean, that might be true when you're young anyway, because we, less wear and tear. But there is this element of lack of responsibility. Like, I'm going to go to somebody else and they're going to fix me.
we do have that throwaway mentality about all the things in our life, including our body.
Our body, it's like, I'll go to somewhere else. I'll go to someone else. I'm forfeiting my responsibility. I'm going to go to someone else and they're going to tell me, they're going to give me a pill and that's going to fix me, or that doctor's going to repair me or whatever. And it really is, and not to say, I mean, like I said, I've had to go and take advantage of, medical services or whatever, and been with family members or whatever. But I think there's a line that you have to draw and say, okay, well, part of this is something that I have to do.
Yeah, and I think what you're also pointing to is that instructions that are given generally get a general response. But life occurs in the vivid and specific. When we were growing up and I was going to school, we had targets for how many sit-ups we could do, how many push-ups we could do. We used to have this thing called a squat thrust, which, it breaks my heart that I can't do it anymore, but I used to be a record holder, in the 6th and 7th grade for how many squat thrusts I could do in a minute. And that's where you basically go down, your hands to the floor and then kick your feet out behind you and then pull them back in again and then stand up. And you do that as fast as you can for a minute or 2 minutes. Rarely could I ever do 3 minutes at a time because I was spent after 2, nothing left. But it came down to specific and measurable leads to results, that if you can do this for this period of time, you're going to get this outcome. We've gone from a period of time where that has to take place in the physical world to where we live our lives as if just knowing it is enough. I could do that. Or maybe I even should do that, but we'll worry about it when I get to the point, where there's some remedial action that needs to take place. So for years and years and years, the medical community was geared to giving care to consumers. And where you really started to see that go off the rails was in the 90s and probably early 2000s, when it became acceptable for emergency room wait times to be 2, 3, and 4 hours. Nobody ever predicted that that's what our care would start to look like. So part of that had to do with the government being so deeply involved with the regulations, so deeply involved with the insurance, so deeply involved with every aspect having to do with caregiving, that this is what it came to. It got better. There were actually individual regional hospitals. I remember, I was a board member of the hospital here in town for about 6 years. And essentially, I just harped on it. I just basically said, you want to differentiate yourself from other hospitals and you want to get the more lucrative procedures, so we can keep our surgeons busy doing God's work and keeping people healthy or getting them back on the road again. You got to use emergency room as a competitive weapon. Be faster at checking people in. Be faster at triaging them so that you've given them at least a tidbit of here's what we're going to do for you next. There may be a waiting period, but have that come after they've been greeted by somebody, checked into the system, and then at that point also had their vitals taken and determined what the complaints are. Really simple and straightforward, don't you think?
Well, I would add to that, Bill. The other element that is missing now that I notice is the aftercare. Is the fact that there's no follow-up afterwards.
Right.
Like, it's not like anybody, I mean, it used to be that you would go home with specific instructions as to what you needed to do. Afterwards, they would call you and ask you if you had a procedure done or something happened, like, how are you doing? Kind of thing. Now there's no, like, basically when someone walks out the door, I mean, when I fractured my foot, I mean, I drove myself to the walk-in.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it wasn't my right foot, it was my left foot. But there was no question as to, like, how are you getting home? Are you able to drive home? Are you in too much pain? Like, nothing. It was like, okay, we're done now. Follow up with your orthopedist. Good luck. Kind of thing. There was no, and I find that that's really missing now. I have this conversation with my mother every now and then because, like, she still is of the old thing of, like, no news is good news. And I'm like, Mom, you can't have that apply anymore. Just because you don't hear from the doctor does not mean that, because those days are gone. Like, you can't assume that if you had a test result and the test result is negative that you're going to hear about it anymore. It used to be that they would call you either way and say, oh, everything's fine or everything's not fine, and this is what you need to do.
Right.
And now, a week could go by, 2 weeks could go by, and you call back and you didn't get a call, and they're like, oh, you need to follow up because they found this, this, and this. So
Crazy.
that's not there either.
Well, here's the thing. You're still a youngster. But when you turn 65 and start getting Medicare, your world is going to change because all those things are automated. And I think for anybody who has a particular kind of insurance, I can't talk about insurance that's not related to Medicare any longer because I've been on Medicare now for several years. But there's a thing called My Chart.
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely all of that is extremely helpful, except for what I'm also noticing is that sometimes people don't use it.
Or sometimes people are not technologically savvy enough to use it.
Right.
And I think that that's what happens in, let's say in my mom's case. And I still think that no matter what, people would rather speak to a person.
Oh, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I mean,
What I'm saying to you is that if you're at a certain level of technology, if you understand email, you know how to log into a website and that sort of thing, constantly getting texts. It's like, I have an appointment coming up. I'll bet you I've received 9 texts in the last 3 days, 2 phone calls, 4 or 5 emails, all, confirming that I'm going to be there and reconfirming it. But really the interesting part about all of this is I remember the days when you used to go into radiology and there might be 3 or 4 different radiologists working with different machines. Same machine, 3 or 4 different rooms. Now it's like one person in one room and one machine. The other part of it that's kind of interesting too is the care is also being kind of herded to the mothership. That the outlying hospitals are intake for folks to be routed up to Hartford and have their ultimate care or long-term whatever take place at that facility. So we have a high concentration of technology and people And then they have a distribution of bare minimum compared to what we used to have here in this town. And I just think it's really, really interesting because in some cases, these folks are standing around not really doing anything. And in other cases, you're waiting 2 and 3 weeks. So here's where I'm coming from. My initial question wasn't just a gripe. It was like, who's in charge of this? Where do we go to say, hey, you know, we have a consumer complaint where our needs are not being satisfied. It's not okay that somebody who has a potentially fatal situation has to wait a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to even be looked at by somebody unless they go to the emergency room. Is this the system we designed, or did it just go this way? Remember, the emergency room used to be for people who had no insurance. So I asked that question to the wind.
To the wind. Yeah, I know. That's why I didn't answer it.
I know.
That's why I didn't answer it. I mean, I have countless stories from individuals who some have opted, like I said, to kind of now take matters into their own hand. And, you know, and that's the situation. I wasn't in that situation, but I was in the situation where I felt like, you know, when you're sent home with a diagnosis and you're basically told, well, we're going to monitor you for 6 months. And you're like, okay, well, what does that mean for me now? Like, what can I do? And I feel that way for people. And I talk to people about this now. If you have to wait anyway, and I'm not saying this is a solution to the problem. I'm not saying you don't ask the question and you don't try to change the system so that you see people, faster and things like that. But I think then you have to ask yourself, okay, what can I do in the interim? Like, how can I help myself in between? What can I do? Who can I see? What help is there out there? Who can I talk to? Because unless you want to be, unless you want to be at the mercy until the system changes,
Right.
then basically you've got to do something. Because, you know, and I don't know, people ask me this, and I've been on so many meetings in the past, like, few years about this, is what do we do? And I really do, I think we scratch the system and we start again. I just feel like if we say, okay, this did not work. This isn't working. We've got to build a new system.
Yes, and the system's objectives need to be different.
Yeah. Yes. Obviously. Yeah. I mean, I'm afraid the word is escaping me, but whatever, the word's escaping to me. Yes, but the targets, basically, the targets of, like, you know, either let's say patient satisfaction, patient remedy, you know, where remediation, where people actually feel better and their problems have been solved in a timely and efficient manner, you know, kind of thing. Those targets have to be altered. And in the meantime, I think people do whatever they can for themselves. I mean, that's where I am and have been, just
Yes.
because I mean, part of the reason I do is because I hate seeing people suffer and be uncomfortable.
Well, here's another interesting take at it. When you were talking about root causes before,
Mhm.
whatever you think of different people when I speak of them, it really doesn't matter. The point is what message are they carrying? But Bobby Kennedy Jr., his whole conversation has not really been how can we maximize delivery of medicines. It's been how can we design a system that delivers wellness as opposed to remedy. Okay. And why is it that it's so profitable to be in the remedy business? To the degree that his belief is when you look at the root causes, many of them are man-made. Many of them are systemic, and there are businesses that are in business, and we've given them matches to go around and set fires. And then we have other businesses that are highly profitable that we give them fire extinguishers to go put those fires out,
Yep,
That's
absolutely.
the system that we have, according to some of the things that I've read about what he's saying. And it has to do with fundamental nutrition. It has to do what vitamins and what artificial ingredients are going into our food supply without us knowing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What's in our water? What's in our what are like not only what are the medications, what are the side effects of those medications?
Right.
You know, um poor nutrition, and I'm not saying that which goes down to farming practices and whether I mean, I could go on and on. The supplements that you're taking are bioavailable, meaning that they're easily absorbed and the body has the ability to utilize the form that they're in. Or are you just basically wasting your money by taking the supplements because you're told to take supplements?
Right.
And and the list goes on. And I agree. I have a friend who's actually worked in the pharmaceutical, and it's a very, very high level, was the VP of a very large pharmaceutical company. And he left. And I mean, I think he retired, but I might have left before. And he said he got tired of creating medications for what he called lifestyle issues, lifestyle diseases, where, and he said, he now owns a company which specializes in medications for very, very targeted illnesses, which are basically genetic disorders that are, might be hundreds of cases globally, like things like that. Because he said, like in organ conscience, he couldn't do that anymore. He couldn't, have people work in a field where basically billions of dollars were spent on ailments which could have been prevented had people taken better care of themselves.
Right. And if somebody had been able to sit down with them and say, here's your plan. Okay. You're not going to come up with your solution on your own without having somebody who's got a track record for understanding what sorts of behaviors redirect the outcomes. And what we learn as youth, when our bodies were more resilient, as you said, is that you can abuse them up to a point, and when they tell you to cut it out, then you take a day or two and you cut it out. But a lifetime of that behavior, there's no recovering from that. You can't take enough time off. You can't come back from 35 years of smoking. You can't come back from 35 years of overeating.
I mean, my friend who's a sleep specialist says that once you don't get she's like, yes, you can go forward and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do now because I'm going to get more sleep now. She's a sleep specialist. Okay. She said, but basically the sleep that you didn't get, you never get back. It's not like you can say, okay, well, I'm going to make up for it. She's like, there's no making up for it.
There's no bank anywhere for unaccumulated.
Right. And then, I just read, maybe I'll share it with you afterwards. I just read something. Actually, it's in the book that I have, Constellations 2 by David White. And he has a thing that's actually the chapter's called The Body. And so some of it is really good. I'll just send you an excerpt of it later. But it's, I think the body is a pretty miraculous organism. When you give it, look at what it does and all the different systems and how they interact and everything. I mean, the other thing that's become a huge issue, which has been developing over time, is the compartmentalization of the body, is that the systems work independent of each other. It's and that doesn't work because that's not how we function. Yes, we might have a problem with this area, but that area affects every other area of the body.
Yes.
And the fact that our system has become, and this has been for a long time, where medicine became so specialized in that this specialty and that specialty, and nobody among those specialties talks to each other.
Right.
And nobody communicates, and everybody doesn't think of their body in that way as an interplay of these systems. That, I think I have a heart problem. I think if it's just in my heart. Well, first of all, the heart affects the brain, the heart affects the gut, like there are more signals that the heart sends to the brain than the brain sends to the heart.
So, yeah, the distinction of systems are that people aren't recognizing their subsystems as opposed to a system in and to themselves.
Yeah. It says, he says, okay, the mind cannot fully contemplate or appreciate or understands the body's thousands of interlocking, interdependent, connected systems and the way those hidden systems connect with the world. The way the body's never ceasing beating, pumping, circulating, breathing, in and out busyness, all
Right.
combined with an inner, restful, autonomic guidance that needs no act of will or effort or management on our part to keep it going. And I mean, I'm not saying like about outside, but I mean, the body, like all those systems, like the heart beats basically without us knowing. I mean, we breathe. We're not conscious of our breath. Our body just breathes, all the time. And until we have a problem or we don't pay attention or we do like something that's really, we sit in a room with toxic chemicals and then all of a sudden we can't breathe, or we put loads of stuff on our body, which actually has harmful chemicals, or we're exposed to air pollution or any of those things. But in general, the body itself is it's amazingly designed.
Well, the neat part of it is the poor designs stopped reproducing. Somewhere along the way, each of those things that didn't work gradually went out of existence. So when you're thinking about our time in this body and in this place, when we get to the point now that we recognize that there's remedial action called for and we don't know what it is, what would be a reasonable amount of time for somebody to wait to get a functional answer, or to get something that puts you back into motion again? So we don't do that. We don't start with what would it be, and then now let's figure out what would that cost, and then now let's figure out how we would deliver that. And if those three things don't add up to making any sense, we don't do it. We just continue to let people die. But that's different than ignoring them and just taking statistics. There are some people that are interested in, how do we change the system? But what's the access to doing that? Who do you call? Can't call people on the periphery. And you sure can't call people that are responsible for making money, maintaining the system they've got now that doesn't do what we want it to do. So I think it's like, why do rich people, why do they build new hospitals? Oftentimes it's because they're aware of a situation that didn't work in the existing ones. And they made a decision they're going to finance, a different approach to solve it. But, just having an organized voice. Let's make up a straw poll right now. Let's pretend that you and I can go out and we can ask 50 of our friends. Just 50. Are you satisfied with the care delivery system that we have in place now? And A, would you like to see it change? Or B, are you perfectly satisfied the way it is? What percentage of those 50 people do you think would say, I'm not satisfied with it? And then what percentage would you think would say, I'm perfectly satisfied with it?
I mean, I can speak for the people that I hang out with. I would say, I don't know if I know of one person that would say that they're satisfied.
I'm going to go out on a limb, Jan, and say that person probably hasn't tried to use the system.
Right. I mean, anybody I know has had more than their fair share of circumstances, let's just say, whether personally or family member, where the system did not work.
Yeah, no, remember, we're not talking about the individuals, the caregivers, and those folks. This is a different question. We're talking about the system as a whole. Did it deliver what you needed to deliver in the time frame that you needed it? So I'm in agreement with you. I'm postulating that the only people that would say there's nothing wrong with it are the people who haven't used it.
And then, yeah, I was going to add something, but I'm not sure about it.
It's fine with me. You can add whatever you like.
Yeah, I think that, and I look at it because I ask myself this question, all the time. Like, what do we do? How do we fix, like, what can we do or whatever? And I think that, first of all, I think part of it, what we can do, in my opinion, is it has to start with us. Whether it be that we have to either demand it, we have to stop. Like I can't even tell you how many doctors I've left through the years.
Right.
Because they wanted me to do things that I wasn't willing to do. They wanted me to take medications that I wasn't willing to take. They wanted me to, they wanted me to fit in a box, and I wasn't a box. Like a certain amount of, oh, well, you have 3 of these 4 diagnoses or 2 of these 3 diagnoses. It must be this kind of attitude. And I wasn't willing to settle for that. And I found health professionals that were more open-minded, were more able to, not like they weren't like, oh yes, you're the, what's best kind of, like they weren't they weren't coddling me. They were just open-minded and able to investigate or able to question.
Yes.
And I think that that's the only way, because I think if enough people want that or demand it, then that's, the only thing I can think of these days to do. It's like, I said this to somebody the other day, they were commenting about it, and she was saying that her doctor poo-poos that whatever. And I said, personally, I would find a new doctor, that's just my opinion. I'm not saying anybody has to go out and do that, but, I don't know what the solution is. And I think that's when
while you're speaking, I'm thinking about, the whole, in the 80s and 90s, we started talking about, wellness, doctoring. And this was where people could actually go in and insurance would cover, 2 physicals a year. And then what it ended up happening, anecdotally, very little beyond taking measurements. How's your blood pressure? We did the blood test and all your numbers are, within spec, et cetera, et cetera. Your weight is a little bit high. There's this, that, and the other thing. But rarely was the emphasis on, here's how many steps you need to take a day. This is the actual nutrition plan that you should be working on. It wasn't wellness. It was actually another screen to produce more people showing up for tests and more hospital bills.
Well, the other thing that happened, and this happened quite a lot during this, I think the big jump was during COVID, was, and because I've gone like enough to enough healthcare visits or with my parents through the years now.
Yes.
And my friend who was caregiving for her mom and her father, and now her stepfather, her mother passed away, but her stepfather now, who has Parkinson's or whatever. And she says, I noticed that the doctors never physically examine them. Like they never touch them.
Right.
And I noticed that with my mother. I've gone to the doctor with my mom. The doctor literally never physically examines her. She looks at her blood work on her computer. She comments a whole bunch. The nurse comes in and takes her blood pressure and, probably her temperature. I can't remember, but never does an actual physical exam. And that got worse during COVID when we were all of a sudden, telemedicine is great, but there are certain things like what is someone's like looking at someone's ears, looking at their tongue, seeing what their skin is like, checking their reflexes, like all those things, which, my friend commented to me that she's like, I can't believe how I can take my parents to the doctor and no one and the doctor doesn't touch them.
I gotta tell you, Jan, I'm sitting here, testing my own memory. I'm in complete agreement with you. I remember as a kid, even into my 20s and 30s, the first 5 minutes of every time seeing the doctor wasn't conversation. It was, as you said, we're going to test your reflexes. We're going to take your temperature. We're going to weigh you. We're going to, test your blood pressure. I'm going to get the stethoscope on your chest and I'm going to listen. Every time we went in, they don't do that anymore.
Mm-mm.
They ask you, what's the matter? And you tell them, and they say, oh, you have this. Go fill this prescription. In some cases, okay?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, they don't even ask necessarily what's wrong, especially if you're going in, like, how have you been? First of all, most people aren't going to say how they've really been anyway.
Right.
And second of all, in the time that's allotted, most doctors don't want to hear how you are because they don't have much time. So they're working on a time frame that's not very, substantial. And, they, a few times I've noticed that when I tell doctors how I am, like in all honesty, they look bored.
They're not listening to you.
They're not listening. And I can tell they're not listening. They look bored, like they don't care.
Yeah. I do have to tell you, on my own personal experience right now, the last 3 physicians that I have been interviewed by for whatever reason, when they needed to go in for a visit, they've been awesome. Absolutely attentive, absolutely empathetic, first name basis. Like we're in this together, and there were years and years and years where I didn't see that at all.
I mean, I have to say that a little bit recently when I had something done. Now the guy was really great.
Yeah.
He was really good, but that's a rarity, I find. In a lot of cases, I don't know where I was at recently where I could just tell it was like that, like I said, boredom or not really listening. And
yeah. So here's I guess we've gone all the way around the planet. We're coming back to where we started. And what ends up happening is you have really great people who work inside of a system that is designed flawed because it does something other than produce the result that it was intended to originally, where money has shaped the current design and kind of morphed it away from what it was originally intended to do. Remember doctors doing house calls?
there's a wonderful book which I read years ago, and I actually got a copy of it for a friend, and I think it might be out of print, but it was called The Youngest Science, and it was by a gentleman named Lewis Thomas, who was his father, who was actually, I think he was like the president of Memorial Sloan Kettering at one point.
Yeah.
But his father was a physician at the turn of the century, and he talks about going on house calls with his father.
Yeah.
He went to so there's the book is quite old, and he must have been the president of Memorial, probably in the 60s or 70s or maybe earlier, kind of thing. But it's a beautiful book where he talks about medicine being an art, and the shift of medicine to a science. And I mean, it's beautifully written. And he talks about the beauty of the house call, the fact that, you saw where patients lived. You saw what their home environment was like. You saw all those different things, which were so far beyond that now, but that patients were looked at as people and not a body part, not a system, okay, this is they were human beings.
Yep.
Yeah. Beautiful book.
So, as we're getting to the end of our podcast scheduled time here, what kind of thoughts would you like to leave with our listeners, and maybe for me and also for yourself, that I think would be a good summation and or suggestion?
I begin each morning where I get up and, and my first sort of question in my head, is okay, how do I feel? And what do I need? What do I need? What do I feel I need today?
Right.
Because I think that we have to start looking at the signs earlier than a major illness. And that does not cost you any money. Yet, anyway. Does not cost you any money. And I would say, I don't know if I've had any, I think that's a very easy thing to do, is to start to notice and start to ask yourself those questions. And then I say this in my classes now, what's one thing, and I'm not asking you to change a whole lot or do a whole lot, but what's the one thing, one lifestyle habit that you feel like you could do? Right. That's easy for you. That's not going to change your schedule. That's not going to require that you join a gym, and it's not going to require that you exercise for an hour a day. It could be, I'm going to drink more water. I'm going to make sure but choose one thing, in my opinion. And don't settle. Don't settle for poor care.
Yeah. Very sage advice. Thank you. So, with that said, I will just remind everyone that our mission here on this earth, some would say, is to leave it better than we found it. And I think the way you could actually express that and have it available to you in your life is by contacting somebody that you love, somebody that's a really good friend. Reach out to them and just let them know that it matters to you that they're in the world, that if they ever need anything at all and they're contemplating a last telephone call, it's your number they should dial. We can do better, in terms of lifting up our friends and reminding them how close, at least a hug is. And I think with that said, Jan, anything else from you?
Nope, Bill, I'm good.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, still and again, we are lighting the candle, a world that works. By golly, we are working hard on continuously having this world work. Bye for now, y'all.
Bye-bye, everybody.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Xvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.